Just because you've said something does not mean that you are totally immunized and inoculated from ever being held liable for it. We'll talk about the significance of those comments in just a few moments, because I've got an amazing group of legal experts standing by to dissect and walk through all of this. But first, I want to begin with CNN Senior Legal Affairs correspondent Paula Reed. Paula, look, Bill Barr set up today's development. So I want to know, what do we now know tonight about what the plan is for Trump to build a defense?
We're starting to see the broad contours of a legal defense here, and they're really trying to hit on this idea of infringing on his freedom of speech and saying that here the government has allegedly criminalized political speech. But what that fails to take into consideration is the fact that the indictment outlines exactly how this went so much further than just words and lays out the specific series of alleged actions that the former president took. Now, in the alternative, they're also arguing this good faith belief that the former president really believed that the election had been stolen. But prosecutors were one step ahead of him, laying out in the indictment multiple instances where he either admitted that he did lose or that he had officials telling him that, in fact, there was no basis for these claims.
Paula, stick around. We need your insight tonight. And right now, also, I'm joined by David Aaron, a former federal prosecutor with the DOJ National Security Division. We've got Sophia Nelson, CNN contributor, opinion contributor, and also former House Republican Investigative Committee counsel. Vita Johnson's also here, an associate professor of law at Georgetown University, and Ankush Kordari, who is a former federal prosecutor as well. In other words, we got us a panel. And I'm glad that you're all here, because the number one question I keep getting, including at the grocery store today, was what's up with this whole free speech discussion, the political speech notion? Is it true that as long as Trump was saying something about his views on the election, that he's protected? What do you think?
Well, yes and no. The Attorney General, the former Attorney General, said it best. You can have free speech, you can say what you think, you can even lie. But you can't engage in a conspiracy to commit fraud and do other things that are crimes. That's the line that Jack Smith is going to have to walk.
I mean, the indictment, and that's a great point, because, you know, first of all, we already have laws that say if you say certain things, you're going to be liable. I mean, if I were to then try to hire a hit person with my actual words, because I said it, I'm not protected, right? Defamation, also a part of it.
Threats.
I mean, threats, a great example of it. But why is this having legs? Is it because people believe, like, look, it's so nuanced and it's political, and can he criticize people?
I assume it's people who haven't read through the indictment and see all the actions that are being alleged that former President Trump actually took to bring about his plan to overturn the election results. I mean, if you look through what is being alleged, there are actual concrete steps, like trying to line up the slate of fake electors. So there's certainly things beyond just words here in this indictment.
So it's the fact that the words are a part of the action. It's not like you're saying, and I think maybe he's trying to avoid a First Amendment defense in many respects, right? He lays it out and says he's got every right, I'm paraphrasing here, to say these things. But they were likely prepared for the First Amendment, but it's the action you're talking about. That, look, I'm putting these words in here to show you that it's part of the overall conspiracy. Is that right?
I think that's right, and I think you're absolutely right. The special counsel saw that this might happen because it's in some of the first pages where he lays out what, you know, the fact that Donald Trump had every right to talk about and even to lie about what he believed took place with the election.
What do you think?
You know, every time, you know, sort of significant legal news pops around Trump, an indictment or some investigation, there's always a few days where they're like test driving these really bad arguments, right?
Yeah.
And then they eventually kind of settle on one or two that maybe will sort of carry them through. And we're in the sort of the test driving phase. I think this is kind of a crazy argument because, like, I used to prosecute financial fraud cases. They're all about speech, right? When someone calls you on your phone, you get a spam call, someone's trying to get your iCloud credentials or get you to turn over your credit card. The fact that they're speaking to you does not somehow make that protected by the First Amendment. It's a crime, right?
They're saying, look, it's political, though. I mean, this is obviously a campaign. And one of the things that the lawyer said yesterday was, hold on, what if, and this was a kind of a forward-thinking whataboutism, which I love that sort of creativity after a long day of news. It was the idea of, what if one day Joe Biden says something that you don't agree with? Is that going to be criminalized? This is different.
It is. I do think that the political character of the speech is what's giving this theory the legs that it has. I also think it's a theory that's probably aimed more at the public than at a judge or at a jury. And a lot of members of the public, as well written and concise as the indictment is, a lot of people aren't going to read it, they're just going to hear about it. And the fact that the speech was political in nature, I think will lead a lot of people to attach that First Amendment idea, at least temporarily.
Political in nature? Oh, sorry, Sophia, but political in nature, you don't have to shrink. I'm going to let you
No,
tell
no,
you.
no,
So
no.
what was going on here?
No.
You stopped dead in your tracks just now. All I was going to say was political in nature, meaning it's coming from a politician's mouth?
Correct, and it's tied to a political process. Doesn't make it any less fraudulent, doesn't make it any less dangerous. But because it's not made in the course of a financial fraud or, sorry, go ahead.
I think for the public, we should define what is political speech and why it's different from regular speech. Political speech is probably, and correct me if I'm the most protected or the one that we really look at and want to guard, because you're saying something that has to do with an election or your opinion or your assessment or your analysis, or you're saying how you feel about it, right? He did all of that for sure, but he crossed the line, as the former Attorney General said, and that's what I think the public needs to get. I think we're all telling you, yes, he can say what he wants, but there's a line of criminality that none of us can cross with our words.
I'm hearing some amen nodding over here.
Yeah, I think the key point was the one that you made, which is it's not just words. The words were intended to produce actions, right? And I think calling this political speech, I understand that, but and there are real First Amendment issues surrounding criminalizing certain types of speech. I don't want to just be flip about it, but the First Amendment is designed to promote truthful public debate, right? And so it's for that reason that the First Amendment does not protect fraud, right? And yes, it's political speech, but in this instance, it's not just like talking about his position on a bill or something, right? We're talking about speech that was aimed at overturning the election, right? We're talking about the most dangerous form of quote-unquote political speech, right? Subverting our democratic process. So I think, like I said, I mean, they're throwing things against the wall, in my estimation, and we'll see what sticks.
Well, I'm surprised a panel full of lawyers, not one of us said the word allegedly, so I'll say the word allegedly to give us cover for all the things that have just been said. But let me just play for you for a second what Bill Barr had to say in terms of how he felt about Jack Smith's integrity. Listen to this.
He's an aggressive prosecutor. He's the kind of prosecutor, in my view, that if he thinks someone has committed a crime, he homes in on it and really goes to try to make that case. There's no question he's aggressive, but I do not think that he's a partisan actor. He personally.
You think he's treated Trump fairly here?
I don't know whether he's treated Trump.
From what you've observed, I guess.
Yeah, from what I've observed. I don't know him, but I know a lot of Republican lawyers who have worked with him over the years. And they tell me he's a tough, hard-nosed prosecutor, but that he is not a partisan prosecutor.
I mean, that seems to belie some of what we're going to be hearing about this language of the weaponization of the government, and that, well, I think the word was deranged that Trump used on Truth Social to describe
One of the
him.
nicer words.
It was one of the nicer words, right? Which is saying something. But, I mean, this idea, the partisanship of a prosecutor, it's always called into question whether they have some sort of axe to grind. We hear about that all the time. But is there any evidence to support this talking point? Doesn't mean it's not going to have any legs, but is there evidence to support this view?
Absolutely not. Jack Smith comes from the Manhattan DA's office and then a career job at Justice. He's a classic product of those institutions, playing it down the middle, going very aggressively when he believes that someone is guilty and that he has the evidence to prove it, staying within the ethical lines for sure. I just don't think there's any evidence of that at all. And I'd say the same about his team.
There's also another clip he talks about where he was asked about who's paying it, right? The old, where is this money coming from? Who's paying for the legal fees? Listen to what he had to say.
I find that sort of nauseating. I mean, this guy claims to be a multi-billionaire, and he goes out and raises money from hardworking people, small donors, and tells them this is to defend America and to, take care of the election. He didn't provide any significant support during the 22 elections, and a lot of this money seems to be going to his legal fees.
Well, he's nauseated. I want to ask you, Vita, because you have been and also oversee public defenders, where you're talking about people who, as much as discussions are happening in politics right now about this haves and have-nots and a tale of two justice systems, which I think is true. The haves and have-nots are in stark contrast in terms of what they're able to access for justice. But that conversation doesn't really contemplate something like this.
Well, I think that's what's so
interesting about this case is that it took so long to even be brought. I mean, what everyone saw on January 6th was truly mind-blowing, and it really is the most dangerous kind of act for our country to try to undo the election results of American voters. And so the fact that it took 2.5 years for there to be charges, I think, is really the surprising part. And so that's sort of my answer to some of the questions about, whether this is a political prosecution. But every day in Superior Court, where both you and I have practiced, we see the poorest people, the people with the least social capital, prosecuted by the Department of Justice. And so for the rule of law to mean anything, there has to be people with power, and Donald Trump had the most power of anyone at the time, who get prosecuted when they cross lines. I mean, otherwise, the rule of law doesn't mean a thing.
I mean, he was at the time that they're alleging some of these things, the head of the executive branch of government, whose job it is, of course, to enforce the law. Look at this civics lesson happening on a Wednesday night at 10 o'clock. Everyone stand by.